Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar on screening, specifically with the topic of sanctions. I am Chester Crucy, a treasury consultant at Finius, and I have dealt in my present life and previous roles quite extensively with KYC and also with sanction breaches. And I'm joined today by Markus from Scheidt, senior consultant at Finius, who has spent many years as a banker, supporting clients and also helping them with KYC and sanction relevant questions. And last but not least, Anders Meinert-Jorgensen, who is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Avallone, a software company. Anders himself is also a seasoned banker who has extensive experience on compliance and knows quite a bit on sanction screening. Before we get into our presentation, just a couple of items of housekeeping. The slides will be shared with you after the webinar. We will send them to the participants via email, absolutely not a problem. And the second point is we will have a question and answer at the end of the webinar. So you are welcome to post your questions in the chat and we'll look at them after the interview. So on the agenda today, we will be discussing mainly three things. After a brief introduction of Finius and Avallone, we will talk about the importance of bringing the entire company around the topic of sanction screening and how to get that support and basically best practice in stakeholder management to then, in the second part of our conversation, set up a robust process and what it takes, what are the best practices there. And then the third part of our discussion today is going to be the demonstration of a digital solution that would offer to automate that work stream with respects to sanction screening. So today, as I mentioned, I have Markus from Scheidt and Anders Meinert-Jorgensen joining me, and I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about your companies. Markus, what does Finius do?
Thank you, Chester. So I hope you can hear me. That's great. Okay, so we'll start. So happy to introduce Finius as a consultancy company, and Finius is a consultancy company for corporate clients and financial institution, and it's based in Eschborn near Frankfurt. We are privately owned and we've been in business since 2000, and we're covering predominantly clients in the DACH region, which means Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. With a focus on the organizational consultancy, Finius combining special knowledge and skills in architecture, processes, IT knowledge, and also project management. We're helping our clients in the sectors of financial institutions, public sector, and corporate clients in order to optimize their business model and processes. And the team members at Finius are experienced. We are qualified problem solvers, highly skilled, and working on equal footing with our customers. And I think the smart mix of business knowledge and IT expertise and the theory and practice help to bring projects to a successful close. So I think that's what Finius is and what they do. Chester.
Thank you, Markus. Anders, Avallone, after banking, what is your vision?
Yes, thank you. So we have a pretty grand vision, as the vision should be called a world where financial crime is in the past. And just to dwell on that one for a moment, so we all talk about non-compliance, breaches, how do we build strong processes, but and also who failed and who didn't fail in this, looking back at some of the large incidents in history, especially within banking. But I think we often forget the underlying problem, the underlying crime. So behind any terrorist financing, behind any money laundering, behind any sanctions breaches, there are people, criminals trying to launder funds and other illicit gains through money laundering. And these funds comes from a real crime, and that is, the most horrific crimes, money laundering, drug trafficking, human trafficking, illegal arms trading, organized crime, etc., etc., etc. So So while we're very focused on the mechanics of combating financial crime and fighting money laundering, there's a even deeper purpose underneath, which is actually the underlying crimes. So that's our vision, where we can have a world where financial crimes in the past, because that will hinder real crime, or the underlying crimes as well. And then our mission, more apropos today, and our customers, and I'm going to only talk about the first part of the mission, which is empowering companies to eradicate financial crime. And this is exactly bringing tools to the world where corporate funds and banks can have a meaningful impact and actually help them with this task.
Lovely. Thank you for sharing. As promised, we'll now have a deeper conversation about raising the awareness. And I remember when I was myself working in corporate treasury, took a little bit of explaining to management the importance of ensuring that proper screening were in places. From my experience, the screening process was kind of left with a bank, in the sense that we would get occasionally an alert from a bank, hey, do you mind checking that transaction? It is related to sanctions. And I think there are much better ways to operate this and to go about it. So, Anders, what is screening and why do we do it?
Yeah, so I think whatever the saying is, sweet child has many names, right? So just to dwell a little bit about what is financial crime prevention, at least in our definition, and you might find other definitions as well, but it consists of 5 sub-elements. So there's obviously counter-terrorist financing, where we are focused on where are the money going to, versus anti-money laundering, which is one lower here, where we're focused on where the money coming from. And those two disciplines are fairly different, because very often terrorist financing is done is very, 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 very small increments and amounts, where money laundering is done in usually larger amounts. Then we have anti-bribery and corruption, where we're obviously focused on people with power, especially public power, misusing their position for personal gains. Then you have tax evasion, which is a more newcomer on the block, at least in the definition of financial crime prevention, where we're obviously trying to avoid large tax evasion schemes, but actually also just in everyday life, where people earn money, but then some of them they keep underneath the table, so we can't have the tax proceeds work towards creating better societies, more kindergartens, taking care of the elderly, all of this stuff. And then finally, we have financial sanctions, which is more of a geopolitical thing, where we're trying to use sanctions to drive democracy across the world and drive desired behavior among some countries or some people. So obviously, all of these connect in some degree, and we'll come back on to the next slide. How does then KYC connect into it? But this is obviously why, and in the context of why we're working hard with financial crime prevention, and specifically financial sanctions in this context.
So what you're telling us is screening is about identifying anything that could go into one of those 5 areas of crime.
Yeah, exactly. It could be, and that's also, we'll come back to, screening is broader than just sanctions, obviously. Absolutely.
So you mentioned that KYC and screening have a relationship. Would you mind telling a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so you could say KYC is the foundation behind everything, and sometimes we joke with that KYC is like cleaning underneath the kitchen sink. Nobody wants to do it, right? Because it's pretty crammed, and it's not a very pleasant job, but it has to be done. So the matter of the fact is that you get kind of what you screen on. So if you don't collect enough data points, then the quality of the screening is impacted, obviously. So you need to. One thing is just, let's say you're screening your suppliers, and you could then just screen the supplier name, right? But you could obviously collect more data points and thereby screen on additional data points, and thereby making sure you get all array around the counterparty or the supplier, whoever you're trying to screen, or you're trying to also understand the risk of, right? So a typical example is that one thing is knowing the name of the company, but also understanding the ownership structure above. Who are the ultimate beneficial owners? What is the control structure? Who runs the company? Who's the leadership? Et cetera, et cetera. And the more data points you collect, the more thorough is your due diligence. And in that due diligence is obviously also the screening. And when we talk about screening, it's screening against which everyone, I think, connects with it. It's the sanctions, terrorist as well, politically exposed person, but then also very importantly, adverse media. And that is an opportunity to get more input in around the counterparty you're going into partnership with, and why those two things connect quite a bit.
Thank you for sharing that. Next question. We keep talking about the importance of screening. Who is responsible within an organization when a sanction breach has occurred?
Yeah, well, everyone, no one, right? And especially if the breach has occurred, it's typically no one. But I would say you could take the governance part of it, right? Which is an easy answer, which is to say, well, the CEO and the board, they're responsible for everything, right? The other answer, which makes no sense either necessarily, is like everyone is, right? So everyone has a responsibility, and that's not operational for anyone, right? So typically what we see and what's also opinion is that it's a shared responsibility among a few departments, and now we're focusing down on corporates to some degree. Funds in a bank, it would obviously be much more compliance or in the compliance department, but typically in the corporates it would be in treasury. It would be in legal and compliance, those three departments. And that's coming back to the definition of who are your counterparties. And that's why, if you've seen, we've been trying to do a little bit of a battle of renaming KYC from know your customer to know your counterparty, because know your customer is such a narrow definition, right? It is really counterparties, and counterparties can be customers, suppliers, investors, targets you invest into, people that buy assets from you in M&A transactions. So it can be a very, very broad range of counterparties. And that drives where the responsibility is. And the more counterparties you need to perform due diligence on, collect KYC and screen, the more departments will be involved in this. But in the end, initiatives like this needs to be driven from the top and have an owner. Otherwise, it gets too distributed.
Right. So what you're telling us here is screening is important, and it can't just be left with one department. It has to be a joint effort within a company. And
Absolutely.
Occasionally, unfortunately, from time to time, a sanction breach does happen. Marcus, what is the impact of a sanctions breach?
Well, I think the quick answer would be it's a huge impact on individuals and companies. But to be more concrete and seriously, the most obvious impact of sanction breaches is a fine from the regulatory bodies and also criminal proceedings. And as indicated on the slide here, sanctions breach can happen to anyone and are consequential and costly. What we have already seen, and that is depending on the jurisdiction, whether it is a sanction by EU, US, or UK regulatory bodies, penalties and fines, including 30 years in prison or huge fines up to $20 million. I think, however, the penalties from the market of the involved company could be even higher due to the loss of trust in the company. Customers might cancel recent orders, or, which is more painful, delisting the company for supplying goods or services. And also the feedback from the adverse media have a negative impact on the company's reputation. So I think it's not a good advice to rely just on the screening of a banking partner, as they are not infallible, and it's even safer to rely on a daily updated sanction list in your own environment, right?
Yeah, we've heard anecdotes of that happening, where unfortunately the financial service providers were not infallible. So that's the impact, quite consequential. But what's the cause of this? Why would such a sanction breach happen in the first place?
That's a good question. So I think what caused the sanction breach, and so what we have observed, what I've observed, is sanction breach basically caused by, let's say, insufficient information and the lack of transparency. And I think we all know in the business of these days, we need to deal with an increasing number of sanctions. For instance, we have, with the beginning of the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, back in 2022, 24th February 2022, the issued sanctions raised from 2,500 up to 7,500 in just 2 months. So timely and accurate information about the current sanction is a key element to avoid sanction breach. On the flip side, if there are not enough information available or the information are not provided in a timely manner, the risk of sanction breaches will increase respectively. So I think that's what I mean.
Right. So always got to be careful here. Hannes, what does it take to convince stakeholders to get on with sanction screening processes?
Yeah, so I think if we compare in the banks where they're obviously more mature, you could say they've become mature predominantly by use of the stick, right? They've been beaten and punished by regulators throughout the last 10, 15 years. And I don't think that's the right way of doing it, as maturity also comes into the corporates and the funds. But I think it is a combination. So I think, first of all, if you need to convince your executive management and board around the importance of this, it's obviously to explain them the risk picture, the downside, right? And there, I think it's pretty easy to find 5-10 examples of corporates that has been in breach and where the reputational and regulatory impact has been large. But I also think it is a much better way of driving things is to use the carrot, which is also to explain what are actually the good things about this. Because it's not just about, it's not so binary that you figure out who can I deal with and who can't I deal with. Well, in the end it is, but you can understand a lot of things around your counterparties, your customers, your vendors by diving deeper and having a structured process in terms of collecting KYC and performing various screenings on them. So it's important to understand in any partnership you go into, it's important to understand who am I actually partnering up with. I think that will save you for a lot of problems later on, but it can also be used more opportunistically in terms of what are the business opportunities when doing this, and thereby looking more broadly at the data you collect and what you ask your partners about when you go into a collaboration with them.
So what you're telling us is don't just look at the punishment, if you will, for potential breaches, but really try to, and I'm going to put it in the words of what I've heard at a previous employer years ago, establish a culture of compliance within the company. Look at the opportunities to raise the bar with respect to values and basically enhance also the reputation of the company this way. It's not just to watch out for the punishment, but really try to be a level above.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's fascinating, and what we've talked now in this first part so far is sanction screening is something a company needs to take ownership of and look at making sure the right people who deal with counterparties are involved in the process and be aware of the stick, but also look at an opportunity to really build a culture of compliance within the firm to really be well protected and also basically be a good example. And so that leads us in the second part of our conversation today, and that is once we've understood the importance of KYC and sanction screening specifically, and we've got people on board, is the conversation about how do we go on it. And that question is now open for both Marcus and Hannes. First of all, how have companies dealt with sanction screening and who is the lead? It's a bit of a, what have we observed now in the market so far?
So not sure, should I start, Hannes?
Please.
So, okay, happy to do so. Well, I think, to be fair, I never met a company without any sanction screening process, right? So I think in many of the companies that I've met with, the process are segregated and not jointly managed, and that is, I think, that could be a problem. And also, it's clear, and everyone is aware that there are sanction screening processes in place, which resided in a department, but ideally, our relevant stakeholders would be connected to that process for the daily business, right? So I think that's something which needs to be achieved, but it's not the practice not right now. And I think that's from my perspective, how companies dealt with sanction screening these days.
Hannes?
You know, I think segueing back to the comment from before around the maturity in banks versus the maturity in the corporates. So the high maturity we have in banks today, we can see that's coming more and more into the corporates for many reasons. And a lot of it is, of course, driven by regulatory requirements around sanctions compliance, but a lot is also driven by the need for protecting your reputation. So you can be in compliance with the laws of the world, but you in breach with the expectations of your stakeholders, right? So that's driving the maturity curve up quite dramatically at the moment. So I think what we see very often is that the screening is done purely on the legal entity name, so the name of your vendor or the name of your customer. Now we're focusing a lot today on obviously business to business, so the enterprise screening, and then you stop there. So where obviously where practice is moving is, okay, we need to understand the ownership structure deeper and get to the ultimate beneficial owners to really understand who am I dealing with in this context. So I think that's the move we're seeing, but I think still there's a lot that are still stuck in the initial way of doing it, which is fine because then you get started. I would rather have that than no screening at all, obviously, right? But I think that is the biggest observation we have currently.
So what you're both telling me is there is something, but it's not quite where it could be, and there's still room for improvement. Marcus, when we talk a lot about digitalization in the world at the moment, almost gives people a headache when we hear about digital this, digital that. And, you know, try this new technology. What should one think about before buying a solution, going with an automated process, and everything digital?
I think there is no, first of all, there's no, let's say, universal path to a robust sanction screening process or KYC process which fits to all companies. But basically, and that is also shown here on the slide, there are elements of a robust process which should be used. It ideally starts with a review of the current process, that's for sure, and then which needs, and also let's put it this way, I think this process is, or this review is not just one review. You need to do it on a regular basis, time to time, and I would say in the next step, I would think about, do we all have the required internal parties and departments involved? Do we need to involve further parties and stakeholders in the company to improve the transparency in sanction screening? And I think in terms of the sanctions screening data, and that's also shown on the slide here, it's worth to check whether the existing data is sufficient in quality and quantity, or needs to be expanded or updated. And furthermore, in the next step, the identification of the risk from the business, which should include all departments, ideally, an evaluation of risk, and especially what the risk means to the company. And I think in the end of this first iteration loop, the question is how to avoid, or at least to reduce the risk from the sanction breaches, and what needs to be implemented to minimize the risk by identifying harmful business counterparties in time. And then again, as earlier mentioned, then again, the second iteration loop starts with a further process review on due course. Does that answer the question?
I find it fascinating because what you're telling me is you don't just go about setting up a process once. What you're telling me is the process is a living organ. And once you've set one up, you have to regularly review it and try to see if you can improve it to make sure that basically you're catching up with the reality of the business changing and also the external requirements that are coming from, say, regulators. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, I can agree. So the thing is, so it's an ongoing process, right? Due to the fact that we have a very huge development, be it in sanctions or regulatory environment, so that needs to be reviewed on a regular basis. I think that's the best way how to deal with it.
I like that. So it's not just because you've got a process somewhere in your company that you're done. It's something that you should look into regularly and look for ways to improve it. Great. Question now to you, Hannes. How would a platform help optimize such process once you have it in place?
Yeah, so I'm gonna stay a little bit more generic here, because obviously we built the Avallone platform, and we'll demo that in a few minutes. So in general, around digitization around the process, I think is important. So I think what we need to understand in the complications of it, that you have to collect KYC on more and more different counterparties. And I think that's also what many of the companies are experiencing out there, that they receive a lot of requests coming in from different counterparties. Their banks are asking, investors might be asking, auditors, law firms, bookkeepers, vendors, customers. So there's an avalanche of KYC, right? So that requires that you are able to drive different processes in terms of collection. And this means that what a platform can offer you is you can be much more flexible, that it's not one size fits all, but you can actually request one part or one set of data points from your customers, and another from your vendors, and a third thing from I don't know, your construction companies, whatever it might be the need. So thereby you can gain obviously this flexibility, this agility that everyone is looking at, and you can also gain efficiencies, right? Because a lot of the process today are super manual. So you sit and send out emails, you're trying to collect data points, you store them in various places, there's no one source of truth, so that starts to become painful. And then coming back to what we discussed before, the connection between KYC and sanctions is obviously that when you have a strong KYC process, you almost automatically get a very strong sanctions process or screening process, because you are screening on a fair amount of data. And that does a lot. It gives you higher quality, it gives you more accuracy, but it also drives down your false positives, simply because your data is better and more accurate, right? And then just mentioning one last thing that I know no one wants to hear about, but that's the whole privacy GDPR part, right? So it is crazy so how much data that is exchanged via insecure email. So I think also we need to do a push towards safer environments where we share especially KYC data.
So what you're telling us is, for one, a reduction in the labor and manual work, a reduction in errors, and also greater safety, and particularly data privacy respect.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Marcus, I've got another question for you, and
Sure.
that one is more about what you said earlier. You talked about segregation within a company on screening. In other words, what we're hearing is there's a bit of a silo culture when it comes to KYC. And my question to you is, what is the remedy to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, referring what Anna's saying, that the process is a highly manual process, right? And that means if you work in a silo structure, the workload will increase. And I think for companies and organizations that have grown, accustomed to operating in silos, it often starts with a perception that there is a silo structure in place which needs to be changed to achieve better results for specific tasks, such as sanction screening, for instance. And then communication and establishing let's say, a collaborative approach for sanction screening is key to break these silos, so that departments can benefit from having shared approach and database that pull them together rather than to divide them. For example, departments, be it, let's say, sales, procurement, legal, treasury, might then align the sanction screening database to ensure more efficient use of sanction screening systems. And that could potentially help to reduce the workload through, for instance, false positive or false negative results in the sanction screening. And once a unifying approach for sanction screening has been established and communicated, it needs then to be translated into the everyday behaviors of departments and individuals to gain traction. So I think that is more or less the remedy to a silo structure from our perspective.
Collaboration, that's what we keep hearing,
Yeah.
isn't it? And work together. Don't just do it in your own corner.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. So we've discussed now in this part Once management's on board with look at the sanction screening processes and let's see how we can make them better, we understand that the process is not something we do once in our life, but it needs to be done regularly. And once there is a process that involves all the right people, you can then look at automating it to improve efficiency. And collaboration here is the key to ensure that there is no corner left outside in the organization in that critical function. Are there any concluding remarks you'd like to say on this before we move on to the demo?
Yes, would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. No, but I think it's coming back to process design. So I think what would be easy to say from a founder of a tech company is just buy software and then everything will be fine. But that's obviously not true. So software is part of the solution and it can do a lot of amazing stuff, but there needs to follow a process and a process design. And that doesn't have to be super difficult. Everyone is about to fall asleep when we talk about process design, right? But it's just making sure that things connect. I think we've seen too often that people push the play button on KYC and screening, but then they haven't really thought about who's actually looking at the screening alerts and who's making the decisions, right? And another thing I would like to highlight is with things that, okay, let's admit it, very few people love KYC and screening. I mean, very few people, right? So people, and when there's something you don't love, you tend to look for the holy grail, something that make it easy and make it disappear. And I think here people should be careful with relying too much on public data. It sounds right. It sounds amazing, right? We can just browse the internet and then we've done the KYC, but it just doesn't solve it all. It's a remedy of it, but you need also to reach out and have a conversation with your partner, whether it be a supplier or customer, whoever it is, saying, before we start to do business, I have a few questions for you. So there's something extremely strong about asking your partners to self-declare a few details around ownership. I think that's my critical points.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anders. And just to add to what Anders is saying, and from our perspective, and again, that there's no universal path to a robust sanction screening process, and the process is an important part of a solution. It's not just the portal or the platform or the software, whatever. It's very important to improve the collaboration between all relevant stakeholders in the company, and then checking the database and in quality and quantity, that will help to identify and evaluate the risk from the sanction screening process. And then based on that, that's my opinion to find and implement proper tools and procedures to mitigate the risks.
Thank you. Hannes, I think this is a moment some of our audience members have been waiting for. How does an efficient sanction screening look like once processes have been established and you now have decided you've chosen to go digital?
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Chester. Let me just share my screen. And you should be able to see now a legal entity structure coming up. Perfect. So I'll give a quick demo of the platform, and any questions just shoot away in the chat, and if we won't be able to answer them after the demo, we'll definitely do it after the call directly. And also some may be more technical, so it'd be more suited just to reply directly. So what you're looking at is the platform in production. So we don't demo in Sandbox or stuff like that. So this is what our customers are using, and the Avallone platform as an intro can be used for several things, but in general, we split KYC into two. One is responding and the other is collecting. Responding is when you have the need to share your own KYC as a company to banks or investors, whoever is requesting it from you. And collecting is obviously when you have a need to collect either because of regulatory requirements or reputational protection requirements. So collecting KYC from what we call, as mentioned before, counterparties, investors, customers, suppliers, agents, whatever. And what you're looking at now is just a quick show us of how do we work with the legal entity structure of your own company, where you can actually zoom in around who are the beneficial owners, and you can work with the data on your specific legal entities and start to share that data. But today it's not about this. Today it's about collection. So I'm going to jump into the collector, as we call it, and show you around. There are 4 components to collection, and all of this obviously leads into the screening. So you're not in the wrong webinar. This is the right place to be. So the 4 components are: who are you requesting from? So who are your counterparties? What are you requesting? Number 3, very important that people underestimate every time. What's the experience of the person you're requesting KYC from? Coming back to, if you have in the back of your mind, nobody loves KYC, then that experience, that customer experience is extremely important. And number 4, when you have the data back in your own hands, how do you work with the data in terms of assessing it, approving it, risk scoring, and the screening, obviously, as well. And those 4 components I'm going to quickly go through. So in the platform, you can add counterparties. And when we talk counterparties, you can choose, it typically starts, is it an individual or is it a legal entity? The platform is primarily built for enterprise grade use. So it's very, very often legal entities that our customers are creating. So you can simply create a manual counterparty here with a contact name. So you actually don't need a lot of data points to start to collect KYC. And you choose the role, which is obviously there's tons of roles and tons of examples of where you want to collect, right? Depending on your need. Obviously, you can upload CSV if you have a massive list, or connect through APIs. So it's connected into a CRM system, which for larger volumes is highly recommendable. So now you have your counterparties and you know who you want to collect from. And then it's about time to define what do I collect. So you can create a request of a KYC request, and it can be, again, legal entity, individual, or you can use a template. Let's just try and build it from the scratch up, and then we give it a name, and you can give it a description, and then you can choose in your own structure what companies does this relate to. Let's say this is your North American subsidiary that are collecting on their vendors, then they can do it this way around. And you can of course include people on the team that you want to help you with this collection. And now you're ready to define what am I collecting. And remember here, KYC, you typically split into 3 phases. You have information, which is what is your name? And you reply, my name is Chester, and then that's fine. That's an information point. The documentation is that, hey, Chester, I want to see a copy of a passport so I can see it says Chester, right? And the 3rd phase is the verification. I want to know if that passport is valid, verified, accurate, and not falsified. Very, very often we only move in information documentation, and that's because it's increasingly, or it's just difficult to verify most documents. You can do it on passports and a few others, but that's actually it. Even the banks are actually not verifying that much. So we're mainly I'm asking your questions and I'm asking for documentation for those answers, right? Now, the documentations, you can choose any kind of document that you want the counterparty to share with you. So let's say proof of identity for a company, that's typically a certificate of incorporation. Great. And then I actually also want the proof of address for the UBO, that's the infamous utility bill, and proof of identity, that's the passport. So you can choose and say, these are my requirements on the documentation. But you can actually also say, hey, listen, it's also okay if you share a military ID, or you can share a national identity card, just to give the person a little bit more flexibility in what they're asking for. The same goes for the company. Extract for the trade register is also okay for proof of identity. So you get the point. You can kind of build the requirements up. Now, more importantly, on the information, the data points, this is where we use questionnaires. And here you can have as many questionnaires as you need. So maybe you have one for US suppliers, you have another for Eastern European suppliers, you have a different one for investors, or you name it, right? You get the point. So you can tailor make what you want to ask depending on different risk types. Let's just say this is a vendor questionnaire. I want to choose that one. And you can get a preview just to say, hey, what am I actually asking? Yeah, this is actually the right one. I want to use this one. I include it. And then it's included down here. So now you know what you are requesting. Finally, let's choose who am I going to ask. Here you can then include a lot at the same time if you do it in batches, or you have maybe one important supplier down here that you're going to choose and ask for. So do it one at a time if you want. Now you're ready to send it out. You can get a summary, and then let's give the poor person a little bit more than a week to reply to this. You can include a message, but anyway, now you say send. When you send it out, what happens is that the request is now created, and the counterparty, so in this example, a supplier is getting a magic link and can go in and provide the information. And I'm going to fast forward to how that magic link, what it leads to. It leads to a sharing portal. So here you can see they can start to upload documents simply by just saying, yeah, I just drag and drop it. Is it utility bill? Yes, it is, and fill out the information one by one. And as they upload, this goes to complete. More importantly, on the data points. So this is the questionnaire that has been created for this example. It can be a super short questionnaire. We have questionnaires for 20, 30, 40 pages when it's more complex structures. But they can start to fill out, and you can see already now this vendor has been in filling out part of it and answer questions. If there are questions around beneficial owners, they answer this obviously, and they can even say, hey, I have one more beneficial owner, more than 25%. Oh, sorry, and you add that, and then that's added to the structure, so that you now have 2 beneficial owners you can fill out. So simply adding data, and all of these data points become structured data. It's also in the sense that it's logic. So if you answer yes to a sanctions question, it's going to fold out, and you can give more information. The fantasy is your only limitation here. You can ask for anything of any kind, and that's just data points you collect. Once the vendor is finished, they just send for approval. They can also do save and exit at any point in time. Then it saves where they left off. They get a new magic link, and they can jump back in and then continue where they left off. Now, also, when they're done, the counterparty can actually reuse this data and actually getting access to the other part of the platform if they want to. They don't have to, and this is obviously for free for the vendor, because it's you as a company owning the platform and pushing out these requests. Now, let's then jump back and say, how does it look like when you start to have data in the platform? So here we can go in and look at a request that was made previously. And you can see here it's called vendor DD. It's actually not ready yet, but we can go in and see if something has been uploaded. And you can see here that one passport has been uploaded on a UBO, and they start to fill out some of the answers. So whatever the counterparty is putting into the sharing part of the platform, what you saw before, is ending up here for you as a legal officer, compliance officer, treasury manager to look at. You can review the document and say, hey, listen, do I approve this passport? Yes, it looks good. Maybe not, I approve mitigation. It's not super sharp, but I met the person before, so I know it's him. Or you can request a change. If you request a change, then the counterparty gets a new magic link in email saying, hey, listen, you need to go in and change some stuff, and they can see everything they need to change. Furthermore, you can obviously give it a little bit depending on your maturity. If you're working with risk scoring on your counterparties, you can give it a risk score. You can see here that we risk scored this one already on business model and geography. They're both low, and the overall risk is low. But you can go in and change that, and there are a number of sub-risk scores you can give, but you can also just work on overall level and say, hey, listen, this is medium or high, whatever you want. And then finally, kind of leading to what we started with discussing, which is the screening. You can see in this one, there's no match, and that's because it's called Important Supplier Incorporated. There's obviously no company called that, and at least no company there's a match on. But if there is a match, it would pop up here. You can download the screening report so that you have proof, evidence that this was screened at this point in time. And I think more importantly, and something to be aware of, is that when you do this the first time around, there's a one-time screening. So when you onboard the supplier, it's screened. On top of that, automatically in the platform, there's monitoring. So this means if the supplier at any point in time ends up in a match, you'll be notified. So in that way, you have monitoring of your stock of counterparties. Now, how does it look like when there is actually a hit? And we can try and go in and look at some of our counterparties and find one where we potentially could find a hit. And that could, for example, be this one, Rostelecom. So in this one, you can see there's a potential match, and that's both on adverse media and sanctions. Now, when there's a potential match, that's the only time we actually need to work with, obviously, with the alerts. And here we partner up with our third-party provider, CompliAdvantage. So you go directly into the platform and can work with the matches in the platform. And to show you how it looks like on Norsk Telecom would be here. Okay, I can see there's a sanction listing. I can see there's a various media listing, and you can read it, and you can then figure out whether is it a potential match, is it a false positive, is it a true positive, and whatever you now decide over here is obviously carried back into the platform, into the Avallone platform, so you have the documentation in the platform, and then can continue working here. So this means that you predominantly would work in the Avallone platform, but only when you have positives, false positives or matches, you would then work in the Compliant Vantage platform. The reason for choosing Compliant Vantage, we checked out a good number of providers, and they're obviously all very, very good. We primarily looked at the larger ones, but what we really liked here was the whole user interface, the whole UX experience of it, and at the same time they have a very high quality in terms of lists, etc., etc. Finally, just talking about, and then I'll absolutely shut up, just talking about of the data. When you look at data, and let's try and choose one where we have a little bit more data on it. When you look at the data, you can export any data that you have, and you can then use that for other purposes, as we discussed before. So when you look at a request, let's check this one out. And go to the request page, you can then export any data points you have here. So all of the data that you collected in your questionnaire are structured data, and you can collect it or export it for the purpose you may have. You can also request signatures if you want the vendor to sign whatever they're providing you, or you have other agreements that you're kind of baking into your KYC process that you want them to sign. So where we've embedded with DocuSign, obviously. Chester, I think that was the speed talk around the collector. Over to you.
Thank you.